By the end of this video, you will absorb the knowledge that got me to 69% win rate Challenger EU West. For the Keystone, grab press the attack in most matches. Some of Volibear's abilities grant stacks, triggering the effect very quickly. It is amazing when fighting fragile targets or when ganking and tower diving, while still providing great DPS for Volibear's extended fights. Against more durable opponents, choose between either Conqueror or Little Temple, physical and magical builds respectively. Triumph, because the other options are not necessary in the jungle. The most popular choice is Legend Haste, together with the attack speed shot. This makes sense, Volibear functions incredibly well with ability haste. However, what I strongly recommend is swapping them around for Legend Alacrity combined with a haste shot. In this way, I am reducing the cooldown of Volibear's ultimate, which is very long throughout the game, ranging from 160 seconds to 110 seconds. This should also grant you a stronger early game, since you start with plenty of CDR right away, and Alacrity has a base value at 0 stacks. Volibear requires some attack speed to feel fluid, but he also possesses a massive attack speed ratio of 0.7. Last Stand works hand in hand with Volibear since he benefits from fighting at low health. Coup de Grace is an alternative if the match is more about ganking and catching rather than skirmishing, preferred with press the attack. Nimbus Cloak plus Celerity is the standard most common option I recommend. You can never go wrong with it. Volibear must close the gap. It is especially useful against range, mobility, and kiting. In the sorcery tree, I also sometimes run Transcendence with Water Walking, or Objective Control in early game dueling. So, for example, I would consider it against Velvet, Shyvana, Kindred, or a scaling enemy composition. Sudden Impact paired with Ultimate Hunter is a viable alternative in matches where you rely on Stormbringer, especially against champions with very specific crowd controls, or those that create terrain, such as Jarvan or Anivia. Bloody matches where you can often tower dive. Against multiple fighters and tanks, or perhaps along some enchanters, I take Shield Bash, Alas Revitalize, or more combat power. Volibear is of course a top tier Revitalize user due to his massive sustain. Shield Bash is one of the best damage runes in the game, often out-damaging other minor runes as the game progresses. When facing assassins and burst mages, or to fulfill the role of a frontliner, I go for conditioning and unflinching. Resistances are exceptionally powerful as Volibear possesses very high effective health. In the inspiration tree, we can opt for triple tonic combined with Jack of all trades, using similar criteria we have utilized to choose Resolve, but gaining different damage and utility instead of survivability. Some spicy stuff here with triple tonic. It's an exceptional rune for Volibear as points on Q and W are quite powerful. Of course, the other elixirs augment his already solid early game, but this rune choice should be influenced by itemization planning such as Trinity Force, Cosmic Drive, or Mercury Stress, giving a higher amount of different stats for Jack of all trades. Excuse me, sir. X-Flash with Cosmic Insight? I rarely run it, but when I do, I make sure to have some amazing potential for ganks and aggression. Easy setup with laners, vulnerable enemies. That's when you should run this rune. You can be creative, avoid division, counter jungle, X-Flash to safety after killing a grab. Definitely viable, give it a try. In the second row, Adaptive Force is always the best for early game dueling and clear speed. Then I choose Scaling Held. As with most junglers, you already know, it quickly outvalues the flat health. Before I talk about items, I have to show you my new Patreon. Lots of flexibility for the whole family. The custom build for this guide will be there, link in the description. I recommend always starting with Gustwalker Hatchling. Volibear needs to avoid getting kited. Simple as that. His mobility on the map is also quite poor. Let's talk about the root of the build. I use this term to classify the options for the first legendary item to differentiate it from core items, which is a very popular term that can really mean anything. Core item can mean first 2 or 3 items. Root is specific for the first legendary item choice. Most of Volibear's power rests in repeated casts of his abilities, which have high base numbers. That means we require ability haste and health. We also need either AD or AP for a faster jungle clear and higher lethal thresholds. AD items offer front-loaded burst damage, while AP items offer back-loaded sustain damage, since it takes several hits to stack the Relentless Storm. Because Volibear's passive can hit multiple enemies, it's important to note that AP items give you more AoE damage, which excels against stacked fighters and tanks. By no means AD items are inefficient in sustained fights, but AP items are for sure not great in short combat scenarios, often against assassins and ranged champions. One of the most important factors when choosing between magic and physical builds is the damage spread of your own team composition, with magic being naturally better due to the resist growth of champions. In other words, simply build according to your team. Physical mid and top probably means you should build AP. Let's compare Black Cleaver to Sundered Sky, one of the most popular options for jungle Volibear. It grants 10 more ability haste and some movement speed, which can avoid kiting. This can potentially outvalue the healing from Sundered Sky. Keep in mind that all of Volibear's abilities grant him tankiness in some manner, so the extra haste and the lower cost can bridge the gap in durability. The DPS from Black Cleaver is quite powerful, which is why we prefer this option, especially as the game progresses, though they are on pretty equal ground in short bursts. Imagine how Volibear tends to play skirmishes and teamfights. You can very often mark an enemy tank or fighter with Frenzied Maul and continue to play a front-to-back situation by repeatedly healing off the marked enemy. This is where Black Cleaver can excel, as you can also shred its armor for your allies. Sundered Sky should be purchased when you don't have such a target, when it is generally difficult to get a rebuy. I rarely buy it, only against specific assassins and ranged champions. It's very important to highlight that Black Cleaver also has the best build path out of all the root items. Very efficient components which coincide with the flow of the game. For magic damage, Riftmaker holds great potential, augmenting Volibear's already powerful sustain. The damage amplification functions with all damage types. Combining that with the scaling AP from health items makes it a great all-rounder stat checking option. You want to purchase Riftmaker not to overwhelm melee characters and to deal more AoE damage when they inevitably clump together in teamfights. Cosmic Drive is an alternative that grants the most mobility and ability haste out of all the options. It does make Volibear quite obnoxious and hard to deal with, ideal versus champions with mobility and kiting. Though you have to keep in mind that AP Volibear is backloaded and actually needs to sack his passive, means that simply going AD might be a better option in those cases. DPS is quite low, so I don't recommend biting against durable enemies. You might get stat check. Overall, the build path is also quite amazing, making Cosmic Drive a pretty solid option. What about the popular Rod of Ages? A scaling item granting mana, which is rarely useful in the jungle. Well, Volibear wants to be strong early game and very importantly have ability haste. With Rod of Ages, you will often be stuck with no ultimate. It's the same reason we don't build Spear of Shojin anymore. No cooldown reduced on your ultimate. The build path is also much worse than Riftmaker or Cosmic Drive. There is simply nothing particularly valuable about Rod of Ages. Last but not least, I sometimes build Trinity Force. It is great for when you think dealing as much damage as possible, primarily in the early game, will be needed. This includes a potent jungle clear. Some key things to look out for are enemies with low crowd control and sustained combat patterns such as Master E or Artix. It can also be a great item for a focus on split pushing. One of the downsides of Trinity Force is that you cannot purchase Iceborne Gauntlet anymore. Trinity Force is also quite expensive and doesn't offer as much durability as the other items. Although I don't recommend buying Trinity Force very often, it can unleash some brutal damage numbers, sometimes killing squishy targets on the second cast of Frenzied Maul. I always upgrade boots after my first legendary. Even though Volibear loves movement speed, the legendary item completions offer massive power. Simply default to Ionian Boots of Lucidity and swap them for other options if the value is high. Ionian Boots are really cheap and Volibear loves ability haste, and even summon spell haste. Boots of Swiftness often go above just for some extra gap closing power, while Mercury Threads can help the bear move against powerful crowd controls, of course. Though they are not necessary if you don't actually get kited against melee comps. I look to avoid plated steel caps as they don't grant any specific utility. Makes more sense to usually invest the 300 gold towards armor, and getting other items faster should be better in a lot of cases. Build them against multiple auto attackers, not just physical damage. When playing with a lead, symbiotic souls can be a strong investment to further snowball the game, offering more mobility on the map that will aid with engages and collecting resources. Time equals money. It is also great when split pushing because of the empowered recall, which can save you from getting collapsed. As a juggernaut, Volibear's base DPS is quite high. This means we can comfortably invest in durability. The healing from Frenzied Maul directly scales only with resistances. It does not scale with HP because it is based on missing health, not maximum health. With this massive potentially effective health pool, we can assume that armor/magic resist is one of the best stats, if not maybe even the best we can purchase on Volibear. Any respectable build should contain a reasonable amount. With that in mind, I just recommend buying a mix of armor and magic resist on the second and third item slots, prioritizing anything with ability haste. In the armor category, Iceborne Gauntlet is essentially a core item, taking up the majority of games. The reason why I love Iceborne Gauntlet so much is because it provides plenty of ability haste, solid damage with a Shin effect, and a good amount of armor and health. All things Volibear requires to augment his kit in mid-game. On top of that, it comes with a slow effect, which makes Volibear significantly more difficult to deal with. Frozen Heart is the other armor item with ability haste. Simply purchase it against team compositions that heavily rely on auto-attacks to deal damage. This includes champions such as Gwen or Kayle. Deadman's Plate typically comes as a second item when gap closing power is necessary to reach exceptionally mobile targets. Because it doesn't grant any ability haste, Iceborne Gauntlet is typically a much better option for tankiness, DPS, and utility. However, we can often purchase it with a Trinity Force route, because you can buy Iceborne of course. So, simply make sure to run Jack of all trades in order to have enough ability haste on that particular build. Thornmail usually does its job against healing auto attackers, though I don't recommend rushing the upgrade from Bramblebest, as it doesn't give any ability haste. Venus Omen should rarely be purchased early in the build, as most champions do not possess much creatures until the late game. It is a very powerful durability multiplier with the potential to be truly game-changing in the right circumstances. In the magic resist category, Spirit Visage is a massively powerful tool for Volibear. Cheap, granting plenty of stats, including ability haste, and significantly boosting his colossal sustain. It's hard to go wrong with this essentially core item. Abyssal Mask also grants a lot of ability haste at a cheap price. I view it as the offensive counterpart to Spirit Visage, when more damage is required or when there are other sources of magic damage on your team. Only build it on AP builds. Force of Nature is a perfect choice when facing multiple magic damage threats and damage over time abilities. It can grant a very massive amount of effective health against magic damage. The movement speed is a potent tool against mages, allowing you to dodge more abilities and avoid kiting. So it's not just the MR that counters those characters. Canic Rukern, although a pretty strong item, rarely worth considering, mostly because the other MR options are too good for Volibear. Purchase it against Lethal Burst and poke damage. Lastly, Unending Despair is quite niche. In order to be efficient, it requires facing team compositions of mostly melee champions who tend to clump together. The healing is based on the post-mitigation damage, so be careful when facing magic resist items and try to combine it with things that may increase the healing, such as Riftmaker and high HP items, weak in duels, but good in teamfights. As he approaches late game, Volibear tends to fall off. His time to kill goes up. So, what's all that tanking is good for if you don't actually kill anyone? You gotta deal damage. In order to stay relevant, I very often purchase a damage item on the 4th slot. Looking at the options, Spear of Shojin grants the most ability haste, which by now you already know how important it is for Volibear. It boosts the damage of all his abilities, including his passive. It is generally strong for damage output and dueling, while making you significantly tankier. Great against mixed types of damage. An even more defensive alternative, you can purchase Sundered Sky, which is particularly great for teamfighting and frontlining. This dance is a really potent item for the bear. Magnificent, exquisite synergy with the kit. Delaying damage allows for more bites, keeping that healing up. When compared to a classic fighter health item, the armor is greatly increasing your effective health against physical damage. Mauve Marmortius is simply the magic resist version. A big shield with Omnivamp at low health clearly benefits Volibear. As previously mentioned, resistances are king. Campang Chainsword is not something you are looking to have on the menu, but the stats are quite solid for slot efficiency in the late game. Pretty similar to other fighter items. Simply purchase it if there is no way around healing reduction. As an example, by comparison, even though Shojin grants more ability haste, we can clearly imagine contexts where the Grievous Wounds passive severely outdamages the focused will passive. Regardless of the build, Riftmaker offers a significant DPS increase, being able to boost all damage types, with the added benefit of survivability. If there is a good context for Cosmic Drive, it probably makes sense to build it as a first item, but if mobility is really required, it can be purchased in the later stages of the game as well with no issues. Bloodletter's Curse is only effective once enemies have purchased multiple MR items, and should always be accompanied by Riftmaker. Morellonomicon is exactly the same story as Campang Chainsword, except for ability power. What I want you to understand is that AP and AD items are lightly interchangeable, and should be based on how the game evolves, such as armor and MR values, specific synergies, such as Riftmaker functioning quite well when combined with Spear of Shojin, as it boosts the damage of the passive and can often lead to higher single target DPS compared to just buying another AP item. There's nothing wrong with a Black Liver rune powered by a Riftmaker purchase, if the Riftmaker is simply best in slot in that context. You can deviate from the regular build and purchase more damage, for example on your 2nd or 3rd slot, depending on the needs in the game, such as killing tanks, facing high true damage or penetration, split pushing, or working with enchanters. The next category of items I want to explain is the Capstone. Capstone items are late game skewed, build defining items that multiply in some manner with other items. What does this mean? It is to highlight how important it is to usually fit one of them into a completed build. I tend to see many players across all brackets skip these items entirely when reaching the late game. For example, they would buy a Sunfire Cape or a Thornmail instead of a Jackshaw, which is very often a mistake since you could reap monumental benefits. As resistances are king, Jackshaw the Protean is often the best capstone for Volibear, lasting his survivability through the roof when combined with other armor or MR items. If you need burst resistance, damage, or even tenacity, Stella's Gauge has you covered. I don't typically build it often, simply because other damage items come with ability haste. You have to weigh the trade-off. So for example, Thunder Sky can potentially heal more than whatever you are shielding with Stella's Gauge. Hullbreaker should be purchased when you can potentially utilize sidelaning as a win condition. The Hullbreaker is a scaling on hit item that Volibear can easily proc, meaning you don't have to feel locked into split pushing when this item is quite strong in champion combat as well. And in addition to that, you can buff up minions who are grouped into your team. It can help you siege with Baron, doesn't have to be fully split push oriented. If you want as much damage as possible on an AD Juggernaut build, choose Overlord's Bloodmail as your last slot. Typically, as your 4th item you want something else with some CDR, but there are games where this can be a very viable item. Guinsoo's Rageblade is the biggest late game multiplier for AP Volibear. It's a glass cannon, just be careful sacrificing your survivability. You are definitely not the main frontliner in this case. The DPS increase will be gigantic, it's a pretty spicy item. Warmog's Armor can be a very rare replacement to Jackshaw if there is either too much penetration or through damage, or you are dealing with overwhelming poke damage. There is some impact to consider between Warmog and items such as Riftmaker or Unending Despair, which scale with health. The last category is Snowball. Snowball items are items that I purchase when I'm very far ahead and the game is heading in the right direction, usually around a full item up on almost everyone on the enemy team by mid-game. Generally, the best way to snowball your lead as a Juggernaut champion, or fighters in general, is by purchasing cheap damage items that accelerate the game, allowing for surprising little thresholds that enemies won't expect. What the hell, I just got one-shot by Volibear, faster jungle clear, neutral objectives, and even demolishing turrets. That is because you are already just as tanky as you would be in normal circumstances. Once again, there is going to be a focus on cooldown reduction. For physical damage, I typically build Eclipse. The problem with it is that it doesn't give any health, which can make Volibear susceptible to burst. This doesn't matter when you are very far ahead, you can use the constant shields to overwhelm the weaker enemies. Against tanks and fighters, you are allowed to build the forbidden Navori Flicker Blade. Understand the power behind this item and why it's a popular controversial choice for players. What you have to understand is that the stats on Navori are very mediocre, but because the item is cheap, you can build it if you are snowballing and allowed to free hit some tanks. Don't make the mistake of thinking you should build this with an AP item. No, you can't do that. The best way to make use of the crit, think about it, one of the abilities you are funding, primarily Q and W, which scale of AD, is to have a Black Lever. Black Lever will double the value of the critical hits. If you really want to build Navori, you have to meet at least two conditions. You play against some tanks, and you are a bit ahead. Hextech Rocket Belt is a cheap static that will help you catch enemies trying to claw their way back up. Normally, Volibear has pretty solid gap closing, but the reason we buy this item against squishy champions is to get more peak potential while also dealing more damage. We delay a tank item to get immediate damage to snowball harder. Not a big deal. Against tanks, you can alternatively grab the much more stat-checking Noxious Tooth, which is typically very hard to fit in a build because of its lack of survivability. The PvE experience will be significantly accelerated. That's one of the upsides of building Noxious Tooth. Lastly, if you think it might be more fitting to snowball by being an immovable wall, Heartsteel is a great choice. Not only Volibear has health scalings, but he has a pretty good time stacking this item. Typically, it doesn't make sense to build Heartsteel because Volibear wants resistances and it doesn't grant any haste. But when snowballing, you have a lot more freedom with your itemization and with acquiring stacks. If you are here just to blindly follow a build, you can run this setup every single game and do just about alright. In contrast, here are some really niche builds that I actually took from my own games. If you want to take your builds to the next level, check out my Doom Knight tier on Patreon. For just $6, you can see me breaking down 13 different situations from challenger level games. You will actually learn how to utilize all the information in this guide in order to put it in context. I also made a secondary YouTube channel. Links will be in the description. For VODs, gameplay, and more casual stuff. because the main channel will be reserved for guides only. Just drop a subscribe. The next guide will actually break the meta. That's pretty much it, guys. I really enjoyed making this. Thank you for watching. Take care.